Price. I'm the head of school at Nova Middle School, and I'm delighted that we have Emily McMason here with us tonight. Emily is a coach and a consultant in private practice. She studied astrophysics at Wellesley College, has a master's degree in education from Harvard, a graduate certificate in parent coaching from the PCI at Seattle Pacific University, and completed a postgraduate program dedicated to childhood sleep. Emily's office is in Olympia, and she works with parents all over the globe. Most importantly for tonight, she's a proud Nova, a parent of an alum, Eleanor, who is a senior at Olympia High School. So we are delighted that Emily is here with us today. If you missed the very beginning when I said that if you are here for clock hours, if you'll drop me a note in the chat that has your first and last name, then I can make sure that you get marked off. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll be sure to tell you a little bit about what the process is going to be for clock hours. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn it over to Emily. Thanks so much for being here.
Welcome, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my screen, which of course, oh, there we go. Nope, hang on, quick second. I'll get this done just right. There we go. All right, welcome everyone. Really glad to have you here. Again, my name is Emily McMason. I'm so glad that you're joining us. I have two kiddos, a 22-year-old and a 17-year-old, Eleanor, who is our Nova alum. As Tiffany mentioned, I have a private practice here in Olympia, and I work with parents. I work with tweens. I work with teens, couples, state agencies, businesses, on all sorts of subjects. But tonight, of course, that subject is middle schoolers, which is near and dear to my heart because I also used to be a teacher. And these kids matter so much in this age group at a time when there's so much going on in their bodies and brains. So before we begin, I'm sure that for many of us, it has been a very long day with lots to do and never quite enough time to get it done. So actually, where I would like for us to begin is taking a big, long exhale. So it's going to look like this, taking a little breath in through your nose, and then a sharp inhale through your nose, and then a long exhale out, right? Maybe even as you're going to do it, close your eyes, think about all the stuff that brought stress and anxiety to your day, and let it go. So it's going to go like this. All right, ready? Let's do it together. And one last time. This specific kind of breathing is called the physiological sigh. And the research out of Stanford last February showed that that is actually the #1 way to start bringing ourselves out of a flooded state back into being regulated. So it's a great tool to give our kids to use. They can use it in right before math test. They can use it in carpool when they're getting upset with somebody else that they're sitting next to. They can use it at home. They can use it on the field. The other really interesting thing about the research for that was not only is it great in times of stress, it is a great background practice. So part of the research showed that if we breathe that way for 5 minutes a day, so let's say you meditate regularly, breathe that way during meditation. Or say you take about 5 minutes to drink a cup of coffee in the morning, or you've got about a 5-minute drive after drop off at Nova and heading back to your next destination. If we breathe that way for 5 minutes each day, it improves our mood for the remainder of the day. It improves our sleep for the whole following night, and it lowers our baseline heart rate for 24 hours. So I just wanted to introduce that as a first tool, both for us and for our kiddos. And now we're going to turn to kind of one of the burning questions for tonight, which is, what on earth is going on inside the brain of my tween or teen? So When we sit down with our kids to talk about puberty, or maybe let's be honest, sometimes it's about avoiding sitting down to talk to them about puberty, the topic on our minds is their bodies. What changes, why, and what all of that means. But that conversation is actually missing the biggest part of puberty, the brain. Because while their bodies may start the process looking like this and then end up looking like this, the thing that changes most during puberty is this, the brain. The brain changes far more than the body does during puberty. And those changes begin before we even begin to see the changes to their bodies. So what's going on? When the hormones of puberty begin cascading through their brains 6 to 7 times a day, there is a massive rewiring of the brain that also begins to take place. How can we know when this is happening? By looking at our kids' sleep patterns. When your kiddos were elementary schoolers, they were probably falling asleep at what we think of as kid bedtimes, 6:30, 7, 8 o'clock at night. Then they hit 5th or 6th grade, or even into 6th or 7th grade. And these kids that had been going to bed just fine in 3rd or 4th grade suddenly can't fall asleep at all. Suddenly they're up and wide awake until 9 or 9:30 or 10 or even much later. Why is that happening? Because these waves of puberty hormones put a hold on the pineal gland. The pineal gland's job is to produce melatonin, something most of us or lots of us have heard about and talked about. Do we add melatonin to our kids to help them sleep? Do we not? What's going on? Melatonin is the hormone that tells us that we're tired. The pineal gland gets influenced by lots of things: daylight and darkness, the temperature in the room, neurotypicality or neurodiversity, the timing of screen lights, and the hormones of puberty. So once your kiddo is staying up much later or having a really hard time falling asleep, this is one of our clues that the brain rewiring has begun. As a side note, if you're curious about how much sleep a child should be getting, elementary and middle schoolers should be getting 9 to 11 hours of sleep every night. High school students should be getting 8 to 10 hours of sleep every night, which is amazing because some of them get about half that amount. And each of us as adults should be getting 7 to 9 hours of uninterrupted sleep in a night. The other piece to know is that brighter kids tend to need more sleep than others. So your 12-year-old may need 11 hours or more of sleep every night. Now, the rewiring that I mentioned doesn't happen haphazardly across the brain at the same time. It's a very orderly occurrence that starts in the back of the brain and moves its way forward to the very front. This begins at puberty and does not end until about age 25. And by the end of high school at around 18, that rewiring is about 80% finished, which is great news, sorta, because the 20% that isn't rewired is right here behind their forehead. And this prefrontal cortex region is where executive functioning is happening. So it's the place where logic and strategy and planning and task initiation and organization and time management and emotional regulation is happening, which is something that we're going to be coming back to. So this rewiring begins in the limbic system, which is the emotion center of the brain. And unlike our phone or watch or tablet or computer, the brain can't turn itself off, upload all new software, and then reboot. It has to rewire and work at the same time, which you can imagine isn't going to go well. Because while the emotion center is getting all this great new software, updating it so it can be super fast and super powerful, the prefrontal cortex, that emotional brake system, isn't yet updated. So you've got this amazing emotional engine revving and this outdated small brake system that cannot keep up with it. Think muscle car engine with the brakes of a bicycle. So on the inside, Kids have this big emotional engine and terrible, tiny emotional brake system. What does that look like on the outside? The emotions that we saw in our kiddos in elementary school get turned up to even louder levels. So a kiddo who once maybe harumphed or sighed is now slamming a door and calling you names. Some of you may have experienced that in the early years until about age 5 or so, as they were learning kind of round 1 of emotional regulation. And now that behavior is back. In addition to the increase in emotional intensity, because the brakes can't damp them down, those emotions also shift towards anger. Anger and the family of emotions that go with it, frustration, pissed, rage, all of those are what are called secondary emotions. They happen when we feel one emotion, say embarrassment or confusion or heartache or shame, a bunch of times in a row, it becomes anger. Or we feel a bunch of emotions all at once and they jam together and explode into anger. Without a sufficient brake system to slow things down, anger is often going to be inevitable for our teens and tweens. So a child that once would have been sad, you aren't allowing them to order extra large fries, is now going to be pissed. And it often isn't pretty. It also won't be predictable. Sometimes your child will handle tough situations just fine, and other times they won't. And neither of you will get a warning of what's coming next. And so both are going to get caught pretty off guard by it. Your child may explode and then look at you like a deer in the headlights, totally bewildered by what just happened. On top of all of this, our kids, well, they just don't think we're cool anymore. And here's what I mean by that. For a long time, they looked at us like this. We were the best, coolest, most amazing people that they knew. They wanted to be like us. They wanted to hang out with us. They never wanted to move away from us. I mean, really, they thought we were so cool. They wanted to be in the bathroom with us to watch, well, us use the bathroom. Now, with puberty, they think of us more like this. They no longer turn to us for the answers to all of life's concerns. Their allegiance moves from their family to their friends. And who they look to as their leader is no longer someone at home, but someone in their social circle. And because they aren't turning to us as often anymore, we don't have the same number of times of natural connection with them. Before, they would ask us what book we think they should read, or what clothes we thought they should wear. But now they're asking others that. They're asking their peers, which means not only do we have more breakup moments with our kiddos, we have less makeup moments. And the net is that our relationship with our kids can feel very different than it did before. So remember that long exhale breath we took at the beginning of the night? Let's take another one now before we dive in and look at how all of this brain rewiring impacts our kids as learners. I think of middle school as the confluence of two tides. There's the choppy waters of childhood that's converging with the rushing tide of adolescence. And this makes these 3 years an incredibly challenging time, which you may remember from when you were in middle school. 6th grade is especially hard on boys, which translates to being especially hard on girls and non-binary students. Why is that? Biological girls tend to enter puberty before biological boys, which means in 6th grade, girls are taller, smarter, and faster than their counterparts. The research shows about the only thing that boys do better than girls at this point is throw a ball, and that's just about practice, which makes the boys defensive, vulnerable, and antagonistic. Sprinkle in the hormones of puberty, and the ways that boys attack girls and non-binary students rises to a new level, and everyone is suffering. What about 7th grade? The research in seventh grade for seventh grade is clear. Probably, again, no surprise to any of you. The meanest grade, K through 12, is seventh. Why is that? Well, it's the time when all that rewiring is happening for everybody all at once. And the laundry list of things I mentioned earlier, there was one piece I saved for right now. The rewiring that also warps how our tweens and teens perceive the people around them has one other piece. They misread the faces and body language of others as more angry than they actually are, which means they hear words that other people are not saying, sounds others aren't making. They read body language that others are not exuding. They see facial expressions that nobody ever made. So when you say, hey, kiddo, it's time to put down your phone and get going on homework, what they hear is, you're such a disaster. How often do I have to tell you to get stuff done? And so they respond with, God, all you do is yell at me. I know you think I'm a failure. I hate it here. Or as they walk by a friend in the hallway and that person glances their way and then looks away, they read it as a hostile rolling of eyes and a guttural groan of disgust. And they walk into their next class and tell all their other friends what a complete and utter jerk that person is and how they were deliberately freezing them out. When you have hallways and classrooms teeming with kids misreading each other and assuming a bigger intent than was actually expressed, you have aggression pile on top of aggression. No wonder seventh grade is the meanest. And now for eighth. By now, students are well into puberty, which means the air is thick with hormones. And at the same time, their executive function, remember that place with the ability to regulate emotion, calm impulses, and think strategically and logically, is still about a decade away. Psychologist Lisa Damour talks about how kids in these years are bouncing back and forth between what psychologists call two brain states, the hot brain and the cold brain. When they are with us, hopefully, they are relaxed and calm. This is the cold brain. The social and emotional intensity that they feel around their friends is low when they're with us. When they're in their cold brain state, they do a great job of thinking. But when they're with their friends, even having fun with their friends, that's their hot brain state. And this is a time when their logical abilities that they have totally fly out the window. One way that this shows up, sexting peaks in eighth grade. So consider a couple of things. Holding off on cell phones until high school if you haven't already done so, or if your child already has one, make sure that all devices are kept in the public rooms of your house. I know this is a hard thing to consider shifting back to, especially after so many kids were learning in their rooms during COVID, but here's why. A few years ago, I had the chance to meet with this SMART research group at Seattle Children's Research Institute. And one of the findings about kids and media, and also adults, is that how we use media is directly linked to where it's used. If kiddos are using a computer at the dining room table, it's a cue to them that they're in a public place, so they behave that way. If they're using a screen in a bedroom, they use that as their cue and behave in private ways. In other words, using technology in their rooms leads them to assume that what they're doing is private. So they write things that shouldn't be said in confidence. They watch content that's above what's appropriate for their age and stage of development, or they sext. So as parents, we can use this brain's situational awareness to our advantage. Keep screens in public places, no screens in bedrooms. That will help set them up for success. All of this switching that our kids do back and forth between hot brain and cold brain all day long adds to the stress that they already are feeling. Those stress hormones create, as authors Emily and Amelia Nagoski write, a cascade of neurological and hormonal activity that initiates physiological changes that help us survive. Epinephrine acts instantly to push blood into your muscles. Glucocorticoids keep you going. Endorphins help you ignore how uncomfortable all of this is. Your heart beats faster, so your blood pumps harder, so your blood pressure increases, and you breathe more quickly. Your muscles tense. Your sensitivity to pain diminishes. Your attention is alert and vigilant, focusing on short-term here and now thinking. Your senses are heightened. Your memory shifts to channel its functions to the narrow band of existence and knowledge most immediately relevant to this stressor. The list goes on and on. Essentially, stress is your entire mind and body changing in response to a perceived threat. And that may seem a bit extreme, especially if the source of that threat is a middle school math quiz. So why does our body respond that way? Well, we evolved in a physical world. We evolved needing to escape lions and tigers and bears, not worrying about whether your favorite book is back in the library. Stress for a really long time was due only for physical reasons. So our response to stress was to change our bodies so we could survive that physical threat, which is great system if you are a zebra running from a lion, but we're not. What we're doing is actually activating a physiological system that evolved for responding to these acute physical emergencies, and we turn it on for months on end. That overloading produces all kinds of serious and long-lasting negative effects, physical, physiological, and neurological. And what do those effects look like for our middle schoolers? Paul Tough writes, the part of the brain most affected by early stress is the prefrontal cortex, which is critical in self-regulatory activities of all kinds, both emotional and cognitive. And as a result, children find it harder to concentrate, harder to sit still, harder to rebound from disappointment, and harder to follow directions. And all of that makes learning very hard. In fact, a national survey released last fall looked at 250,000 students at 845 schools across 20 states, including Washington. And in it, stress, along with depression and anxiety, were listed by 50% of middle schoolers and 56% of high schoolers as the most prevalent obstacle to their learning. So how do we help our kids with this at home? The first thing to do is tell them. In the next week or so, let them know, hey, I learned the coolest thing about your brain the other night. Why should we bother explaining to them what's going on up there with all that rewiring and their emotion center and the impact on what they're feeling? First, because the why normalizes it for them. They realize that if it's happening to all tween and teen brains, then they know that they're not alone. Their experience isn't unique, and what they're going through doesn't mean there's something wrong with them, especially in those moments when they feel out of control. Explaining it also depersonalizes their behavior for us. It reminds us they aren't deliberately aiming their anger at us. They're just kind of an emotional bomb that is set to explode, and we just happen to be the people standing closest to it. Explaining why sets you up to be friendly instead of foes. It gives you both the framework to be able to work together instead of getting mad and storming off. If they know their brain rewiring is going to make them mad at you, then when it happens, they know they don't actually hate you. They just have big feelings. And when they have and express those big feelings at you, you won't think, how dare they hate me after all that they do for them? Instead, it's, oh, ouch, my kiddo just emotionally fell over. And that helps keep you closer to one another. Second, do a tone check. When conversations get heated between you and your child, stop what's going on to check everybody's tone. Often they're going to say something that sets us off with their eye rolling and sarcasm, and we unintentionally set them off with how sharply they hear our tone. So saying tone check pauses everybody, and it gives us a break to check in and reset if need be. When a tween says to us, tone check, it pulls us fully in the moment to really stop. We can adjust or apologize as needed, and we can make a healthy course correction in that conversation. And when we tone check our kids, it's practice for them to be aware of how they sound so they can be successful in conversations with their peers too. Third, offer. Can I be your brain for a second? We've said before, the prefrontal cortex is sort of the grown-up part of the brain. It's the part kids don't fully have yet. So, why would they stay home on a weekend to get a jump start on an essay that's due Tuesday when they could go bowling now and stay up way too late Monday night to finish it? Saying, can I be your brain for a second, helps them know you aren't criticizing them, but are stepping in to shore up their strategy skills and help them be successful. So what does that sound like? It sounds like, can I be your brain for a second? Bowling sounds great. Why don't you put in like 45 minutes of planning and writing a rough draft for your essay before you go? Or can I be your brain for a second? Bowling sounds amazing. Why don't you suggest to everyone that we go tonight? You've mentioned before that afternoon is actually the best time of day for you to work. So you could use that to kind of crank out a draft of the essay, maybe even a second one. And then you'll be totally relaxed and ready for fun this evening. And I'm happy to carpool everybody. Or on Wednesday, can I be your brain for a second? I know working on your essay over the weekend sounded like the worst idea ever. But then, because you skipped it, you were miserable yesterday from having stayed up so late on Monday. Is there something you'd like me to say to you next time this happens to help it from occurring again? These are general ways to help at home. So now let's talk about homework. Before we consider actual assignments, let's talk about the importance of sleep. How does it impact learning? 2 studies of over 10,000 students found that students who have A averages get 15 minutes more sleep than students who have B averages. And B students average 11 minutes more of sleep than students who earn Cs. And C students sleep 10 minutes more than D students. The best way for our kids to spend 36 minutes a day is getting extra sleep. Sleep makes kids smarter. Now let's talk about the physical setting for homework. If possible, have it happen in common spaces, as we mentioned before. Homework at the kitchen table instead of in their rooms makes it easier for us to monitor and step in if need be, easier for them to stay on task, easier for them to behave appropriately online. Another piece of homework. You may have noticed that kids think that homework can be done listening to music in front of a screen, texting with their friends, on social media apps, all at the same time. All of this multitasking is actually a myth. When our brain actually does as it moves from one of these tasks to the next is not multitask, but task switch. Each time our brain has to engage with one thing, it then has to disengage that and switch and re-engage with the next thing. When we task switch, it takes us longer to do each assignment. When we task switch, the number of mistakes made on each assignment increases. The more complex the task, the more mistakes that get made. The same study also found that multitasking has a negative physical effect, promoting the release of more stress hormones and adrenaline. The net effect of all of these things, multitasking can add up to a loss of 40% of productivity. 40%. In kids speak, that means automatically going from an A to a D just by trying to do more than one thing at a time. Homework time is for homework. Full stop. Now, one big piece of a small nuance to that. Things like music with lyrics, texting, TV, apps, all of that are considered high brain functions. They interrupt with the brain function of focusing on the assignment. We don't want any conflicts of two or more high brain functions competing with each other for any of our students, neurotypical and neurodiverse alike. Here's the nuance. For our neurodivergent kids, it can be very important to provide the opportunity to do dueling. Duel like two, not like fencing. This is giving them a low brain activity to do alongside their high brain activity that actually helps them focus. So what does that look like? Chewing gum, bouncing on a yoga ball, listening to instrumental music, playing with fidget toys while working on homework will help keep their focus. Okay, it's actually time for homework. Almost. So before they actually begin their homework, ask the expected question. What homework do you have? Then the unexpected follow-up questions. How do you feel about each assignment? Based on how you feel, what assignment do you want to do first, middle, or last? Not based on deadline, not based on the size of the assignment, just on how they feel about it. And then the practical question, are you going to organize all of that? The really hard thing that's for us to do is allow them to decide themselves how to organize it. Don't try to change their mind. Not yet. During homework, if they get stuck, ask, where can you find help? Who do you want to contact for help? What's the smallest thing you can do right now to move the assignment forward? Okay. Now, what's the next smallest thing you can do? And the next. Find a hook in their assignment. What do you like about this assignment? It might be that you get to use colored pencils to draw a picture at the end of it. Great. Start there and work your way backwards. Then the other thing to do is give them their yet. Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset really looked at if we have a growth mindset or a fixed or closed mindset. And when we have a growth mindset, it's this idea that when we put in effort, we will see progress. So showing them that, you know, you're right, this math assignment feels really hard now. And I remember what you were studying in September. That stuff feels easy to you now. So I can see the arc of your growth. And I get that this doesn't make sense yet, but it will, because you worked through what was hard before. I know that you can work through what's hard now. Finally, after they're done with their homework, have a quick conversation to help them learn about their learning. We can ask things like, which assignment ended up being the most challenging? Which one was the easiest? If you're going to do them again, would you do them in the same order or would you change it up? Why? What did you learn about how to do homework? Do you want to write a note for yourself for tomorrow so you remember what works best? And what do you want to do differently about it tomorrow? This conversation brings their attention about homework out of the details and up to that 30,000-foot perspective so they can begin to see the patterns for themselves. It helps them start the process of creating homework structure that works for them. One they can use not only in middle school, but in the years ahead as well. And over time, we'll be stepping in less and less to ask all these questions so that they can ask them of themselves more and more. Now, lest you think that I just waved a magic wand and everything is going to go smoothly forever and ever and ever with homework. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about what we can do when our kids are procrastinating or are overwhelmed. Procrastination is a behavior that lots of us experience at ourselves. So what can we do to help our kiddos when we get stuck on it on our own? Oftentimes when a child is procrastinating, we're assuming that they won't do a task or change a behavior or whatever, when in that reality, in that moment, they are emotionally in a space where they can't do it. It feels too big. So we want to support them in a way that signals that we're there with them. We see the emotional overload, and we offer ways that we can also work towards finishing what's in front of them. So think yes, and yes, this is overwhelming, and here's how we're going to move forward. For example, cutting the task in half and then cut it down again and again and again until what's left is actually laughably small. So say your tween or teen has to write a paper. Writing the whole thing feels way too big, and they're putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. Okay, why don't you write the first 3 paragraphs? Still too big? Cut it down to the first paragraph. Still too big? Write the first sentence. And if that still feels like too much, just get them to type their name. Really, then you can help them build it out from there. Let's look at overwhelm, which often shows up as anxiety. What if they are refusing to go to school or balking about after-school activities? Help them pull apart the situation from the stress. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're afraid to fly, especially lately. If fear and flying are always entwined, every time you think about a plane, your anxiety goes up. We want to pull them apart so that flying is separate from feeling anxiety. Because right now it might be about flying, but it could also be about trying out for a swim team or about reading poetry out loud in class. We want a child to see that what's triggering the cause doesn't really matter. We can set that aside. What we want to focus on is the tools we have right here inside of us to bring us from flooded to grounded. So whether it's flying or swimming or poetry, I can use the same tools in any situation. Tool number 1 is the breathing that we worked on together at the beginning and in the middle of this talk. A second tool that you can teach them is pressing on the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. It comes out of the back of the skull down here. It wraps around both sides of the neck, and it goes down your chest like a bunch of little rivers. Putting your hand on your chest like this and pressing, or use both hands even, that compression sends a safety signal back to the brain, and it helps relax us out of anxiety and stress. If you think about, we do that often in a situation where we might be in the Nova parking lot and we see 2 cars back up and almost hit each other, or a kid go running past a car that's backing up and there's almost a touch. What do? We gasp and grab our chest, right? We're trying to send a signal to our brain that it's safe and okay. Another one that we can give kids is a self-hug to do. Now, kids may balk at this. I am not going to hug myself in front of other people, right? So you can explain to them, it's putting one hand on their shoulder, another underneath here, underneath their shoulder blade, and squeeze. Now, if they want to do this in the middle of class, they can pretend that they're scratching their back, right? If you've got kiddos that enjoy watching sports, ask them to look for the self-hug of the coaches that they're seeing. Oftentimes we see very big burly coaches standing on sidelines with their arms crossed in what feels like an aggressive manner. If you look carefully, they're actually doing a self-hug without even realizing it. Additionally, they may be swaying back and forth or even pacing back and forth. All of those are ways we lower our anxiety. There are lots of other ways to do that. Please feel free to reach out if you have additional questions on that. One last word about procrastination. Not doing something can, in the moment, ease our fears. I mean, really, why would we want to do the thing that we don't want to do? But it turns out, and the research is clear, that avoiding it actually feeds the anxiety. Not doing it makes our fear of it worse. So try to help them move into it and through it, even in the smallest of ways. Trying to get them going can be honestly incredibly frustrating, which means it may be tempted to, well, bribe them into better behavior, treats, money, trips, stuff, etc. Here's what's important to know. All rewards undermine intrinsic motivation. If we reward them, their own drive plummets. And when we reward them, their sense of accomplishment actually decreases. I want to stay there for a moment. If they do it themselves, their sense of pride is higher than if you offer a reward, no matter how big that reward is. So please, even though it is so tempting, please be with them as they walk through hard times instead of trying to offer things to make it better. Homework is hard, and it's hard to remember our job isn't to do it with them or for them, tempting though it may be. Our job is to help them help themselves through it. All right, with all the information you heard tonight, please remember none of us is perfect. All of us need to offer ourselves and our children grace. And know, just as the memory of those exhausted, sleepless nights when they were babies faded as they got older, so too will the memory of the angst associated with these tween and teen years. One of my favorite things that I hear from my 22-year-old is, "Hey, Mom, do you have time to talk?" It happens. I promise. Thank you all for being here. And now we've got plenty of time for some Q&A.